Joining us now in D.C., NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. In Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster and staff writer for The Atlantic and MSNBC political contributor Mark Leibovich. Shaq, I'm going to start with you. The Trump team is trying to distance itself. The campaign, at least, is. A lot of Republicans are coming out and saying that, hey, they don't want to have anything to do with this. They condemn the joke. But Donald Trump has not condemned the joke. He didn't come out after that joke was said that evening, even after the backlash had already started, to say anything about the joke. He has not said anything since. And then J.D. Vance gets out and says he hasn't seen it, even though it's been shared tens of millions of times. What can you tell us about the internal workings of the campaign right now, and whether there's any pressure on Donald Trump himself to come out and say something?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly signals that this is something that they are taking seriously. The Trump campaign telling our Dasha Burns that at that event later tonight, a rally in Allentown, it's a city with a large Latino population, that the speakers ahead of Donald Trump will be heavy and full of Puerto Rican leaders and supporters. We know that separately we'll expect to see at that rally Senator Marco Rubio, who has come out and condemned the joke that was made on the stage at Madison Square Garden. But the point that you make is really important there, Katie, because we have not heard that condemnation come from Donald Trump or J.D. Vance. Instead, according to ABC News, in a phone interview or an off-camera interview this morning, when Donald Trump was asked about that, he simply said that he didn't know the comedian and he didn't hear the joke, but did not take the opportunity to condemn the joke specifically. So that's something that you've definitely heard, and you mentioned it's bipartisan condemnation for the joke that was made. A lot of people saying or trying to separate the candidate from the statement, but the candidate himself is not doing that to this point. We'll see what he does on stage later today, Katie.
Yeah, we'll see if he addresses it. I mean, this is one of those, if he does, it would be a singular moment for him to address something like this head on, if he apologized. I mean, I'm not holding my breath, but if he were to do it. Yamiche Alcindor, right. The Harris campaign is obviously trying to push this out further. And it is already getting a lot of traction. This isn't separate from the Harris campaign. The videos of that comment have been viewed tens of millions of times. I mean, I think that's a conservative estimate. You have a number of very high-profile Puerto Ricans tweeting that it was disgusting and saying to vote for Kamala Harris, including Bad Bunny. Nate Silver observed this yesterday. Google searches for Trump have spiked to the highest point since the second assassination attempt. Yesterday, more people were Googling Tony Hinchcliffe, the comedian, than Taylor Swift. So this is clearly breaking through. I wonder, are we expecting to hear any more about it from Kamala Harris herself tonight when she's on the ellipse?
It's a key question, Katie. What we do know is that the Harris campaign is definitely seizing on these comments and seizing on the attention that these comments are getting, with so many people calling this a racist joke that was really embraced by the Trump campaign, even though they're trying to put some distance against themselves and that comment, and of course the Trump supporters at that rally. So we've heard from a number of people, including former President Barack Obama on the campaign trail, saying that this really shows that this is a campaign that doesn't respect these Americans, because we have to underscore that Puerto Ricans are Americans, American citizens. But the question here is whether or not Vice President Harris, when she takes the stage at what will likely be her biggest campaign event, whether or not she'll talk about it. And from my understanding, she's going to try to have a hopeful, optimistic speech talking about her vision for America and juxtaposing that from Donald Trump's vision for America. And part of that is going to be that she's going to be saying, I can be a president for all Americans, an inclusive America. She might hint at the idea that Donald Trump's America is an America where people are vilified, where people are shown to be seen as others, and people aren't welcomed. I also know that she's going to be talking about sort of her to-do list, the things that she wants to do, including taking care of the economy and cutting taxes and a number of other things, including making sure that abortion bans are done away with. And then she's going to be saying that Donald Trump has an enemies list and he's a threat to democracy. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not the specific issue on these Puerto Rican comments, these racist comments, frankly, whether or not they come up tonight. But they will surely come up on the campaign trail, and I do expect to hear her talking about this as the days go on. Katie?
You know, it's interesting. The Biden campaign said from the beginning that Their goal was to remind Americans what Trump was like when he was president. They wanted to sit back and let him talk, and Americans would see him, they'd hear him, and they'd be reminded of all the chaos. It didn't really work, according to the polling. But I wonder, Mark, if this is a moment where it works, where this is a moment where suddenly a lot of Americans are looking back to what Donald Trump did when he was president, to a single moment. This is not the pandemic, but going back to the hurricane response for Puerto Rico in 2017. The island got devastated, and Trump went out and threw those paper towels. The aid did not come. He didn't want to send all the aid to Puerto Rico. He wanted to redirect it to Texas and Houston. And then there was the comment that he made, according to Peter Baker and Susan Glasser in their book, that he wanted to try to trade the island of Puerto Rico for Greenland.
Yeah, no, I mean, there is a lot of that. I mean, in some ways, it's a perfect situation for the Harris campaign. The Madison Square Garden event, which obviously was way over the line and deeply offensive to a lot of people. But it's also a perfect reminder of what they're running on and even when it was Joe Biden, what he was running on. And I think Biden's problem was that his own age issues and performance issues, frankly, were making it hard to get people to focus on what Trump represented and what his presidency was like and what it could be going forward. So I think at the Ellipse tonight, I mean, what's interesting about it is obviously this was chosen because that was the spot of where Donald Trump gave his January 6th address before the protesters rioted on the Capitol. And so you have that, and I assume a lot of her rhetoric tonight is going to echo to that and try to sort of contrast herself with a more uplifting message, more unified message. But also you have this Madison Square Garden event, which was only 2 nights ago, and probably is going to linger for the rest of the week. And that is a reminder not just of chaos and just sort of a lack of boundaries and just a sort of unhinged atmosphere, but also just hate, frankly. I mean, No one wants to be associated with that. And it's very different because in the last days of 16, you had Access Hollywood. That was sort of treated, I think, in retrospect, as a bit of a one-off. It's like Donald Trump's being Donald Trump. This is a larger sort of thematic about how Americans view themselves, which I think is, frankly, pretty dangerous for Donald Trump.
Hate and rage and otherism, the joke itself tapping into more of a theme for MAGA world and Trump world and what he was like when he was president and what they've been campaigning on. I think it's interesting, Mark, that of all the jokes that were told or the comments that were made on Sunday, full of racist, misogynistic, hateful comments toward, not just Puerto Ricans, but Latinos more broadly. Also, Hillary Clinton called names, Kamala Harris with the Tucker Carlson, the racist way that he described her, saying that she had low IQ as well. The comments about Jews, the comments about Palestinians throwing rocks. Of all the things that were said on that stage, America's for Americans Only by Stephen Miller, this is the only thing that the Trump campaign is responding to.
Well, I mean, I think it was probably the most egregious, but also, I mean, Puerto Ricans, I mean, they see the vulnerability and they see the numbers in places like Allentown, Pennsylvania, where they have large, Puerto Rican population, certainly Florida and a lot of other places across the country. So, I mean, yeah, it's a very, tangible political vulnerability that they're dealing with here. And I think on the whole of it, this is not a good look for the Trump campaign in the final days at all. And I'm sure Donald Trump is most upset about the fact that this is overshadowing whatever grandiloquence he believes he delivered from the stage at Madison Square Garden. And people are ignoring the crowd and all of that. So anyway, no, I mean, I think it sort of lines up well with what the Harris campaign is obviously going to be wanting to talk about.
Mark, what do you think of what J.D. Vance said about it? He hasn't seen it, even though it's been out there for so long.
Yeah.
Or for so extensively.
That's nonsense. It's a big eye roll. Like, I didn't see it. I mean, it's, what happened. You know what he said. I mean, I do think that the
but
larger
not
answer.
Even that. What about I'm not sure if it is racist. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not.
Yeah, that, again, you could find any number of Republicans who have said the exact same answer in response to any kind of outrage that's come out of the Trump world over the last 7 years, up on the Hill and so forth. I mean, I think what Vance, the larger point he tried to make is, everyone just needs to lighten up. And you saw all those heads nodding behind him. I mean, that is a ethos that the Trump world wants to try to create, like this consequence-free environment where the only thing people need to worry about is just lightening up and letting them, offend who they're going to offend, because that's not the world that they grew up, wanting to live in.